Thanks.
Good morning. Atheists, agnostics, skeptics, free thinkers, whatever you like to call yourself, you are welcome here. At Seattle Atheist Church, we call ourselves an atheist church because you will never hear anything supernatural talked about from the podium. Also, we think it's important to get comfortable with the word atheist for a variety of reasons. If you're curious about that, please, talk to me. And so today we have a talk on eliminative materialism and the emotions. And so what we do is we have anyone who's here today who is interested in giving a talk, please come talk to me or to Jack or to Stephen, and we can get that on the calendar for you. But the church is based on scientific naturalism, secular ethics, and metacognition, just kind of being aware, thinking about how you're thinking. And so, but any topic, as long as it is an atheist topic, is welcome. So today, we get started.
It all makes sense, right?
Yeah, it'll all make sense when Steve gets up here.
All right. Close enough, okay. All right, so let me start by providing some context. So I'm interested, let me explain the overall project I'm interested in. I'm interested in explaining human morality in the broadest possible sense. So I'm interested in what it means to lead a good life, what it means to be a good person. And I also, this is another bias I have, I'm especially interested in the theories of David H. Hume and in Darwin, right, as a basis of morality. And we've spent previous sermons talking about these theories, but the basic idea is that our emotions, our moral emotions, are the foundations for morality, and that's and the proper way to understand what makes people moral is to understand those emotions. Now, that obviously raises the issue of, well, what are these fundamental emotions? What are the emotions that we've been endowed with in nature to allow us to be moral people? And that's really part of what's going on in the talk today. I want to talk more about what these emotions are, where they originate from. So let me start with the disappointing part. As we've talked about in previous sermons as well, there is no established set of emotions that, psychologists or neuroscientists have come together and said, well, these 5 emotions exist. It's actually a huge mess out there, right? There's a lot of different theories about what the basic emotions are. I still find that shocking. I mean, it's amazing that we don't really know what the atoms of psychology are, but that's where we're at right now in terms of theory. So there are 2 main camps out there about emotions. On the one hand, you have a group of people who believe that emotions are natural kinds, that they actually exist in nature, they're objective. If you feel anger, then that anger actually exists. So in this camp, I would put people like, Darwin and Hume and Paul Ekman, and maybe even Panksepp, at least partially. These people believe that we share many of the same emotions that we have with animals. So there's nothing unique about humans, right? That, as Panksepp has discovered in his research, rats have laughter in the same way as humans do. Rats are capable of feeling joy. You tickle a rat, it laughs, which is, kind of scary and freaky, but it's true. Chimpanzees also laugh. Many of the emotions we have, we share with animals. This camp also has used the fact that there's universal facial expressions as a way to argue that emotions must be universal. That's Paul Ekman's work, right? The Lie to Me guy. Paul Ekman has shown that cross-culturally, people have the same basic set of expressions. So if a 4 tribesman in Papua New Guinea gets angry, he's going to show the same expression on his face as a Seattle hipster sitting in Starbucks. It doesn't matter, you could be in Starbucks here or you could be off in New Guinea, you're going to show the same basic set of facial expressions. And then finally they argue from the fact, this is especially true in the case of Jaak Panksepp, that because we can directly stimulate people's brains and elicit emotions, then they must be biological, right? If you could actually cause a person to feel rage just by stimulating a certain area of their brain. They don't feel rage about any particular thing. They just feel rage. And it's a little confusing. I feel angry. I don't know why I feel angry. But the fact that we can do that, and we can also do that with animals. In the case of animals, they show biting behaviors, aggressive behaviors. That, again, is some evidence that there must be a biological basis for the emotions. So that is what I would call sort of the most intuitive camp, right? That's the idea that, emotions are natural kinds. They exist in nature very much like, arms do and eyeballs and everything else about humans. Okay. Then we also talked about the second camp. And the second camp, I'll use Lisa Barré as an example of a psychologist in the second camp. Lisa Barré, she's a psychologist at Northeastern University. And she believes that all emotions are socially constructed. She doesn't believe that they exist in nature. Here's her example. Her example is, take a flower. A flower exists. It objectively exists. It has ontological objectivity. It exists in nature. Even if all the humans on Earth all of a sudden disappeared, there would still be a plant on Earth. Sorry, I should have said plant. There would still be plants on Earth, regardless of whether there's any perceiver or any person out there who can actually look at that plant. But whether or not that plant is a flower or a weed, well, that actually depends on the person observing it. If it's one person might consider it a weed, one person might consider it a flower, and so that only it's ontologically subjective. It depends on, it exists as a weed or a flower, but actually depends on the perceiver. So she wants to say that really emotions work just like that analogy, that they depend on human categorization, and that things like anger or fear don't actually exist independently of humans. They have to be categorized in that way. She writes, physical actions and body states, like plants, exist in nature, but the status of these physical changes as instances of anger, sadness, or fear is created in the same way that a plant becomes a flower or a weed, with a human mind making meaning of physical events. So desert islands, no weeds. There's no weeds on any desert island at all, only plants. And she also says, she makes the unintuitive claim, that if two people disagree about emotion, then neither person is more right than the other. So she writes, a patient might recount an unpleasant situation in the context of describing a great interpersonal loss and categorize that event as anger. His therapist, on the other hand, might categorize the instance as sadness. It cannot be said that one person is literally right and the other person is wrong in purely objective terms, because there's no observer-independent criteria that can reliably and specifically adjudicate the matter. What can be said is that in this situation, an experience of anger exists for one person and a perception of sadness for the other, and one is not more real than the other. So again, perceiver dependent. Whether or not it's anger or sadness, there's no truth of the matter there. It's all in the context of a certain subjective experiencer of the emotion. So where is she getting this? This is very unintuitive. She's getting this, she's basing her work on John Searle's work, the philosopher John Searle at Berkeley, who wrote, one of the books he wrote was the construction of social reality. And Searle's examples are, I believe, much more intuitive than hers, but one of Searle's examples is, the primary one he uses is the case of money, right? Money only exists because we have collective intentionality that a piece of paper should count as money. So if everyone on Earth disappeared, you would just have pieces of paper with pictures of presidents on them. But they wouldn't actually work as money. You have to have a shared concept that something is money for it to work as money. Or take the president of the United States. Barack Obama would not be the president unless we had certain institutions, certain roles. All those things are dependent on groups of people understanding these roles in certain ways. And so what she wants to say is really emotions work in exactly the same way. She writes, if people agree that a particular constellation of facial actions, for example, a scowl, cardiovascular response, for example, a blood pressure increase, and an appraisal, for example, a feeling of offense, is anger in a given context, then it is anger in that context. And it serves whatever function anger serves in that context. If some people do not have a concept of anger, then this constellation will never exist as anger for those people. In explanation, it's not that they are truly angry and don't know it. if they have some other category that's shared within their culture for that constellation in a given context, and that category knowledge is applied, then the instance becomes that mental category instead. This view is dramatically different from a natural kind hypothesis about emotion, which would presuppose that anger exists independently of someone's ability to perceive it. So that's a pretty strong claim, right? If your culture doesn't have a concept for anger, anger doesn't exist. If your culture has concepts for other emotions that our culture doesn't have, then those other emotions exist in the other culture. So that's a pretty strong claim. She also, just to be super clear about this, she also, she doesn't quite say, she strongly implies that animals don't have emotions because, quote, they do not possess ontologically subjective social categories. So emotions, human only, you know, no laughing rats in her universe. Or at least they're not enjoying it. They might be laughing, but they're not enjoying it.
Boy, she lives in a sad universe.
What's that?
I said, boy, she lives in a sad universe.
Yeah, I agree. It's nice to have the laughing rats. Also, she implies that these types of ways of categorizing emotions are heavily influenced by language. So it's not clear in her account whether or not, if we didn't have language, could we have emotion. So it's very much about the cognitive construction and social conventions. That's what create emotions. All right, now you might hear this and say to yourself, well, this is just crazy. This isn't, I know I'm angry. So, there's actually a little test that I want to give you right now. So let me try it. So I just want to ask you, is anger an emotion? Does everyone think anger is an emotion? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay, thumbs up. Okay, we got anger in there. How about hunger? Is hunger an emotion?
No.
No? It's kind of?
That's interesting.
That's maybe some of you think no. Well, some people kind of maybe. No? Okay. So Ada says no. Hunger's not an emotion.
No.
It could be displaced. What I'm saying.
No. Oh, down. Okay. So all right.
What
Oh,
I'm saying
definitely
is
thumbs down on that one.
It could be a displaced emotion when you're hungry for something else, or you're hungry because somebody suggested it.
That's true. Yeah. It could result in How about boredom? Is boredom an emotion? And the reason I'm asking that one is, so realize according to the Oxford English Dictionary, the word boredom first appeared in Charles Dickens' Bleak House in 1852. So I'm not sure if this implies that before 1852 there was no such thing as boredom, but it wasn't part of our ordinary language until after 1852. Anxiety, that's another example of a recently introduced word. I think most people would say that a lot of people feel anxious all the time. So I think people would say, anxiety. How about moods, like being tired or excited or irked? Or how about, I'm horrible at pronouncing words like this, ennui, is that how you say it? How about a general, ennui? Okay, yeah, okay. Well, anyway, so how about a general feeling of ennui? I mean, again, maybe, I don't know. Or how about, here's my favorite example. This is an example from Paul Ekman. How about fiero, which is the feeling of triumph over adversity. It's an Italian word. It's the feeling of triumph over adversity, like in a tennis match when you win and you feel fiero right there.
Like that.
Or finally, how about that feeling of excitement anytime there's a new Star Wars trailer? A new Star Wars trailer comes out. There's that special feeling of Star Wars excitement. Surely that must be a unique type of emotion, maybe. So clearly this is a mess. One more example. I'm going to appeal now to another expert on emotions, Homer Simpson. There's a great episode of The Simpsons where they're sitting around, they're discussing whether or not Homer is jealous or envious of his friend in the rock band. And Homer explains to everyone that no, you're confusing words jealous and envious. He explains that envy is when you want something that someone else has. Jealousy is when you're afraid that someone will take something that you have. And Lisa looks it up in the dictionary, and that's actually right. And so, this is a good example where we had a very long Thanksgiving conversation last night about the difference between jealousy and envy. And honestly, it was a long conversation really about the definition of the words. Everyone had a very, very different idea of what the difference between jealousy and envy is. So I think that there's some reason, you can sort of understand her idea that these types of emotions, these seem, socially constructed, right? I can, maybe in Italy, they feel a lot of that fiora, and maybe we don't feel so much of it here. Maybe it has a function in their society, and maybe the emotion itself, those raw biological processes. She's not denying that those exist, that neurons fire in your brain. She's just saying that to make it a particular emotion, anger versus sadness or whatever, then you have to have that subjective experience to categorize it. You have to have that act of categorization to go from sort of the neurons firing into something that's an actual emotion. Okay, so that's the major two camps that, at least from my research that I've found around emotions. Emotions are natural kinds, emotions are socially constructed. But now I want to talk about a third possibility. And the third possibility is something called eliminative materialism. I'm really trying to build up to there. And eliminative materialism, the reason I wanted to go through the other two theories is it'll kind of make eliminative materialism seem less crazy. That's really my plan here. So eliminative materialism is a position that that's defended by a number of philosophers. It was, I think, first made famous by Stephen Stitch's paper, The Case Against Belief. It's a position that Daniel Dennett defends. But I'm really going to be focusing on the Churchland's idea of eliminative materialism. Paul and Patricia Churchland, they both work at San Diego. They're philosophers. She calls herself a neurophilosopher, but they work at San Diego University of San Diego. And let me explain what the theory is. The theory behind there's really two propositions involved in the belief in eliminative materialism. Number one, that common sense psychology is a theory. And they're going to call this theory folk psychology, right? So our common sense psychology is a theory just like any other theory that scientists might come up with. And we're going to call that theory folk psychology. And the second proposition is it's wrong. Folk psychology is a bad theory. It's a bad theory of human behavior. So Paul Churchland writes, eliminative materialism is a thesis that our common sense conception of psychological phenomena constitutes a radically false theory. A theory so fundamentally defective that both the principles and the ontology of that theory will eventually be displaced rather than smoothly reduced by completed neuroscience. Our mutual understanding and even our introspection may then be reconstituted within the conceptual framework of completed neuroscience, a theory we may expect to be more powerful by far than the common sense psychology it displaces, and more substantially integrated within physical sciences generally. So this is the thesis that our common sense psychology will go away when we have enough neuroscience and be replaced by a better theory of the mind, as soon as we have it. Okay, so let's talk a little more about this idea that we use a folk psychology in trying to understand not only other people's behaviors, but also our own behaviors, that we use it to describe not only other people's mental states, but our own day-to-day mental states. So Churchland concedes that folk psychology is just really, really good at predicting human behavior. That's what we normally use. That's what we use all day. For example, let's say I want to figure out, well, why did John go to the kitchen? Well, what I might do in that case is I might say, I might attribute to John a belief that there's a donut in the kitchen. And I might say that John really, really desired a donut. And given that belief and that desire, John would form the intention and then act on the intention to go over to the kitchen and eat the donut.
That's the difference I was trying to say. If you know that there's a donut versus, gee, I really need food.
Yeah. You have to have a belief, you have to have a desire that has to form an intention, and that translates into action. Yeah, and that's a kind of theory of, that's folk psychology, right? We use propositions. We believe that people have certain beliefs in their head, they have certain desires that motivate them, and the combination of beliefs and desires ends up in action. So that's how we do. That's how we figure out everything that's going on around us. Why did someone do X? Well, I know why he did X. He had that belief and desire. Therefore, of course, he did X. And we all accept that deduction. Now, it's also important, this isn't only used to describe other people's behavior. It's also used to describe our own mental states, right? Gee, I'm bored right now. Gee, I'm hungry for a donut. I believe there's a donut in the kitchen. I'm going to jump up and run and get the donut in the kitchen. I've just described my own mental states. And according to the Churchlands, that's a theory. I'm applying a theory I have about the world to myself and to explain why I do what I do. And to figure out, what my mental states are, it's all theoretically grounded. Churchland writes, Folk psychology is nothing more and nothing less than a culturally entrenched theory of how we and the higher animals work. Has no special features that make it empirically invulnerable, no unique functions that make it irreplaceable, no special status of any kind whatsoever. We shall turn a skeptical ear then to any special pleading on its behalf. Okay, so you might think that, well, this is pure insanity, right? You might think that this is pure insanity because really folk psychology is probably the most important theory that we use in our day-to-day interaction with other people and ourselves, right? We're always using talk of desires and beliefs and all the mental states, all the ones we have in folk psychology. How could that possibly be wrong? I mean, denying folk psychology seems as insane as denying that the sun rises in the east and sets in the west each day. We can see the sun do this with our very eyes. Only an insane man would deny the behavior of the sun. Oh wait, oh, that's right. Yeah, no, the sun doesn't rise in the east. Oh, I forgot. The earth actually spins. Oh, that's right. Yeah, so anyway, so what that shows is we can actually be wrong about things, given a theoretical background, that we think that we have just abundant evidence for from our own way of seeing the world. And Churchland's just claiming the same thing for our ways of categorizing our emotions, our ways of thinking about emotions like anger and guilt and pride and all of that can be influenced by theory in the same way as our understanding of that big fiery ball going up and down in the sky every day can be heavily influenced by theory. All right, so you might be open to the possibility that folk psychology is a theory, but what evidence do we have that's wrong? I mean, we use it every day. It seems to work most of the time. Seems like a good reason to think it might be right. So let's talk about Paul Churchland's arguments why folk psychology is a bad theory. Let's start with his first argument. I like this. He claims that it's a stagnant theory. What he says is, both the content and the success of folk psychology have not advanced sensibly in 2,000 or 3,000 years. The folk psychology of the Greeks is essentially the folk psychology we use today, and we are negligibly better at explaining human behavior in its terms than Sophocles. This is a very long period of stagnation and infertility for any theory to display, especially when faced with such an enormous backlog of anomalies. So basically he's saying, look, we haven't gotten better at it, right? We've been doing this for, at least a couple of thousand years now. We're not that much better at predicting human action now than we were, back in the times of Plato and Sophocles and the Greeks. So that's not a good sign. The other thing he argues is folk psychology is a superficial theory. He writes, folk psychology is at best a highly superficial theory, a partial and unpenetrating gloss on a deeper and more complex reality. So he makes a list. He actually spends some time going through some of the things that folk psychology can explain. He points out, can explain how humans and animals learn things. Doesn't really explain learning at all, especially for pre-literate humans or for animals that don't have language. Doesn't explain how they go about learning things. Doesn't explain mental illness. Folk psychology can't explain autism, for example. Just doesn't have the power in it to do it. Doesn't explain creative imagination. Doesn't explain why we spend a third of our lives asleep. What's the sleeping thing for? I don't know. Folk psychology doesn't tell me. I'm still confused. A third of our life, wow. It also doesn't explain the miracle of human memory with lightning fast retrieval of relevant information. Doesn't explain memory at all. We know memory is actually much more complex than what we understand from folk psychology, that memory is highly constructed and has all sorts of features that we can't explain by using our common sense notions of psychology. And then finally, he argues that folk psychology doesn't fit with our other theories. If we approach Homo sapiens from the perspective of natural history and the physical sciences, we can tell a coherent story of his constitution, development, and behavioral capacities, which encompass particle physics, atomic and molecular theory, organic chemistry, evolutionary theory, biology, physiology, and materialistic neuroscience. That story, though, although still radically incomplete, is already extremely powerful, outperforming folk psychology at many points, even in its own domain, and it is deliberately and subconsciously coherent with the rest of our developing world picture. In short, the greatest theoretical synthesis in the history of the human race is currently in our hands, and parts of it already provide searching descriptions and explanations of human sensory input, neuroactivity, and motor control. But folk psychology is no part of his growing synthesis. Its intentional categories stand magnificently alone without visible prospect of reduction to the larger corpus. So what's he saying here? What he's saying is, hey, you know, science has been doing pretty good over the last few hundred years. All this seems to cohere pretty well together. We have a physics, which is related to our understanding of natural selection and biology and chemistry, and there's this grand synthesis going on. But, you know, folk psychology doesn't really seem to fit in with the rest of what's going on in science. This whole idea of using propositional attitudes and the mental states that we have from folk psychology, that doesn't fit in with the rest of the scientific view of the world. So he compares folk psychology to a number of other theories that have been not reduced or expanded upon, but completely eliminated in the history of science. So he's following Thomas Kuhn's Structure of Scientific Revolutions here. In that book, Thomas Kuhn argues that, you know, in the progression of history and science, rarely is one science kind of improved upon gradually over time and transformed into a new science. What more likely is to happen is, you know, people cluster around scientific theories like political candidates and defend them from anyone who's arguing against it until they can't defend it anymore, and then they just completely eliminate the old theory and replace it with a new one. So examples of that are Aristotelian cosmology, when it was replaced by classical mechanics, vitalism, when it was replaced by organic chemistry, and he spends a lot of time talking about the example of the replacement of alchemy by chemistry. So in all of these cases, it's not that, you know, they really improved alchemy until I could explain everything better. You can't do it. So they just kind of gave up on alchemy and said, hey, that's just not a very good way of understanding the way that, you know, physical materials work. This chemistry seems to be much better. So he wants to claim that folk psychology is like alchemy. That's not going to be expanded upon or improved. We just have to chuck it. We have to chuck it and start over with something that explains at a deeper level the way that the human mind works. Okay, so the final argument that I want to discuss that he makes is that folk psychology is in retreat. The presumed domain of folk psychology used to be much larger than it is now. In primitive cultures, the behavior of most of the elements of nature were understood in intentional terms. The wind could know anger, the moon jealousy, the river generosity, the sea fury, and so forth. These were not metaphors. Sacrifices were made and auguries undertaken to placate or divine the changing passions of the gods. Despite its sterility, this animistic approach to nature has dominated our history, and it's only in the last 2,000 or 3,000 years that we have restricted folk psychology's literal application to the domain of the higher animals. So what he's saying here is, we used to use folk psychology as an all-encompassing theory of everything, right? To explain all of our interactions with nature. But over time, as science has taken up the slack and explained more and more stuff, the domain of folk psychology has shrunk just to us, really, to our mental states and maybe sometimes animals. But we don't use it to explain the rest of nature anymore. We talked a little bit about this in a previous sermon. We were talking about Stephen Pinker's, and where he talks about witchcraft and the better angels of our nature. People used to explain all sorts of things that they couldn't understand out in nature. They would explain why, you know, someone got sick or their hair fell out by appealing to sorcery, because there wasn't a better theory out there to replace those discussions of sorcery with. What Paul Churchland is saying here is, in the same way in which we don't need to use sorcery anymore to explain, you know, disease and so forth, we won't need folk psychology anymore to explain people's actions. All right, so what's the conclusion here? So I've discussed three different theories of emotions. They really come down to three different theories of emotions. First, you have this idea that emotions are natural kinds, that they exist, they're you know, ontologically objective, they exist out there in nature. And in that camp, you have people like, Hume, you have Darwin, you have Poinsett, you have Ekman. Then I talked briefly about Lisa Barrett's idea in that camp. I guess you would also have to put John Searle, the idea that emotions are socially constructive. They rest on shared intentionality. And then finally, I talked about eliminative materialism, which, according to that theory, emotions are part of a failed theory of folk psychology. So, which of these theories are right? So let me throw out some ideas here. there's no question that the first option is the most common sense option. I know I feel anger. I know I feel sad. I mean, it's true that when people are sad, water flows from their eyes. It would seem cruel to say that when babies cry really, really loud, asking for milk, that no, that baby's not sad. That baby doesn't know language yet. It might be sad later on when it can actually express, I feel like crying. Right now, that baby can't be crying. That just seems crazy to me. But I think that giving up on the idea that emotions are natural kinds becomes easier when you consider the fact that we don't really have a list. And each of these people who come up with a list, like Panksepp or Ekman, they differ. I mean, Panksepp, he's a neuroscientist. He's at Washington State University. In Panksepp's list, he has one of his basic emotions as seeking. Seeking is one of his basic emotions. Really? Seeking? Does that seem like a basic emotion to you? Maybe, but it's not intuitive in the same way as like anger or fear is. That makes the second option, that emotions are culturally constructed, more appealing, because it seems so much more obvious, especially for complex emotions like pride and shame and guilt and regret. Those things do seem like they're socially constructed. And as I mentioned, we spent countless hours last night debating about the difference between envy and jealousy. Obviously that's not a felt emotion in the same way as anger is. But it's easy to confuse the second option, the option that emotions are socially constructed, with the third option. And the third option, remember, is the option that maybe we're just completely wrong. Maybe the reason we spend all this time arguing about the difference between jealousy and envy is because we just don't have the right vocabulary, we don't have the right understanding of the human mind yet to be able to really express what's going on. If we had a better understanding, then we would, reduce these Thanksgiving conversations considerably and be able to talk about what's actually going on in our heads. What I want to suggest is, I find eliminative materialism appealing. And I just think that right now neuroscience hasn't delivered on the promise that would come up with a better theory of the mind. Some of the research that we've been looking at from Panksepp is interesting, but we're not at the point yet where we actually even have a good understanding of the basic, fundamental emotions. And so for the project of understanding the moral emotions, I think there's a lot more work to be done. So I'll stop here, and maybe we can get into a circle and discuss.